Welcome back. We are finishing the series with the wildest idea yet. Your body might already be fighting for you, and food can help it win. We get into cancer defenses, blood vessels, fasting, brain health, and the whole food as medicine thing. And honestly, some of this sounds almost too elegant to be real. Like nature had a wellness subscription installed from day one. That's exactly what I kept thinking, because the idea is not that cancer is pure chaos. It's more like tiny bad mutations happen constantly, but the body usually clears them. Which is a much less cinematic story, but probably the true one. Yeah, and the part that hit me is when those defenses fail, the tumor starts building its own supply line. It literally recruits blood vessels like it's opening a restaurant. That's such a messed up but accurate way to say it. And that is why angiogenesis keeps showing up everywhere in this conversation. Not just cancer, but also brain health, which I did not expect to connect so cleanly. The brain is insanely dependent on circulation, and that part made total sense once he said it. 400 miles of blood vessels in the brain is such a ridiculous number. I know it sounds made up until you remember the body is basically over-engineered. What I liked is that he didn't flatten dementia into one thing. He kept separating Alzheimer's from vascular dementia, which matters a lot. Because people hear one label and act like the whole brain just gives up at once. Which is lazy, honestly, because blood flow problems are a huge part of the picture. And then he drops dark chocolate, beets, and spinach like the brain's little repair kit. The moment he says dark chocolate is helping your vessels, everyone perks up. Science always knows how to keep an audience. But the mechanism is actually interesting because nitric oxide widens blood vessels. And that can recruit stem cells, which is where the body gets into this repair mode. I love that idea that the right food isn't just avoiding damage, it's calling in backup. Still, I keep wondering how much of this is clean cause and effect versus correlation. He was pretty honest that a lot of it comes from population studies. Like the tomato data, where men who ate more cooked tomatoes had lower prostate cancer risk. And suddenly tomatoes are getting promoted to frontline defense. Right, not kale, not some exotic berry, just half a cup of cooked tomatoes. That's the thing I appreciate. The dose is normal human dose, not wheelbarrow dose. Nobody is thriving on a tomato swimming pool. And the reason cooking matters is because lycopene becomes more usable, which is such a good reminder that bioavailability is the whole game. Coffee was another one I expected him to oversimplify, but he didn't. He tied it to polyphenols and chlorogenic acid, then linked that to brown fat. Basically, your morning coffee is being asked to do cardio. And apparently 3 to 4 cups is where he thinks the effect is strongest. Which is also where half the audience starts vibrating through the chair. Exactly. Some people are getting health and an existential crisis at the same time. Fasting was probably the most practical part of the whole thing. Because he wasn't selling a mystical cleanse, just spacing out eating windows. The sleep idea was so simple it almost felt unfair. Like, congratulations, you are fasting when you are unconscious. That's the least glamorous wellness hack ever, and somehow the most sustainable. What I liked is that he kept saying there is no universal fasting formula. Because the internet loves acting like one fasting schedule is basically a religion. Then people fail at it and blame themselves instead of the rigidity. His version was way more human. Stop eating after dinner, sleep, wait a bit in the morning. That alone can stack up a meaningful fasting window without making life weird. The supplement section also felt refreshingly non-cultish. He basically said food should do most of the work and supplements top things off. Which is exactly how the word supplement is supposed to work. Not as a personality, just as a backup. And I liked that he named his own choices without pretending everyone needs the same stack. Vitamin D, omega-3s, and specific probiotics made sense in that framing. Akkermansia and Lactobacillus reuteri sounded almost futuristic, though. One of them sounds like a spaceship, and the other sounds like a law firm. And both are apparently helping your metabolism and mood. The probiotic angle was interesting because it tied gut health to the brain and immunity. Even the cavity comment made the whole thing feel weirdly practical. Chewing probiotics for your teeth is such a niche flex. Then he got to the 5 foods he'd actually take with him, and that was a great snapshot. Coffee, tea, tree nuts, tomatoes, berries, and leafy greens if you count the cooking style. Which is funny because none of that sounds like a gimmick. It sounds like a life, which is probably why it works better than a hack. And his bigger point was even better. Pick foods you already love. Circle the healthy stuff you actually enjoy, and you have momentum instead of misery. That is such an underrated principle because most people try to white-knuckle health. Then they burn out and act like the body betrayed them. His whole philosophy is more like adding than punishing. And I think that is why it feels so durable over time. Also, the closing question was unexpectedly beautiful. He didn't answer with fame or achievement. He answered with family and impact. That probably says more than any fancy mission statement could. He basically said, if my work helps my community and resonates beyond me, that's success. Which is annoyingly hard to argue with. Yeah, because the man has the receipts and still talks like a human being. And the part about using platforms to simplify science really stuck with me. He wasn't nostalgic about the old days, he was excited about better distribution. Books, YouTube, public communication, all of it becomes part of the medicine. Which is funny because the hardest part of health is often not the science. It's making the science feel usable on a Tuesday. That's the real test, not whether you can explain angiogenesis at a conference. It's whether a person remembers tomatoes before ordering fries. That's a brutal benchmark, but yes, exactly. For me, this whole episode really closes the series on a useful note. Not fear, not perfection, just smarter daily choices that stack over time. And I like ending there because it feels hopeful without being childish. So that's the series, and honestly, I think it leaves us with a lot to actually do. Thanks for riding through all 4 episodes with us. We loved making this one, and we hope it gave you a few real takeaways. Welcome back, and this one gets practical fast. Food, movement, sleep, and the idea that your body is already defending itself. The wild part is he is not saying food is magic, just that it can change the odds. Which is a much better claim than the usual internet nonsense, honestly. Yeah, no miracle berry cult energy here. What I liked is that he keeps coming back to defense systems instead of fear. Right, like the body is constantly dealing with tiny mutations and usually wins. And cancer shows up when those systems fail and tumors start recruiting blood supply. That blood supply part is so important because it makes the whole thing feel engineered. Like the tumor is not just growing, it's building infrastructure. Literal startup behavior, if startups were evil. That's actually horrible and perfect. The tomato example was a good bridge because it turns a vague idea into a specific habit. Half a cup a few times a week is not some impossible health monk routine. It's almost annoyingly achievable, which is why people ignore it. And the point was not that tomatoes prevent everything, just that they may lower risk. I also liked that he explained how researchers get there through long studies, not vibes. That's the part people skip when they hear a food claim and immediately make it a religion. One study becomes a personality trait in about 12 minutes online. Completely true. The coffee bit was interesting because he framed it as polyphenols, inflammation, and brown fat. So it is not just caffeine giving people a tiny emotional lie in the morning. That's brutal, but yes, the bean itself seems to matter. The 3 to 4 cups idea also feels like the kind of thing people will weaponize. Exactly. Now someone is saying espresso shots count as a balanced lifestyle. Still, I do like that he ties it to actual physiology instead of just motivation talk. And then fasting, which he makes sound less like a fad and more like a pattern we already live with. That was the smartest framing to me because everyone sleeps, so everyone is already fasting. It takes the drama out of it, which is probably why it works better. He is basically saying stop treating every meal like an emergency, or like a hostage negotiation with dessert. The mom breakfast story was funny too because it is such a universal thing. But the actual takeaway was simple. Extend the overnight gap and do not snack mindlessly late. That's one of those things that sounds almost too small until you remember small is the point. And then he moved into brain health, which honestly could have been a whole episode by itself. The blood vessel angle was fascinating because he splits dementia into categories instead of treating it as one blob. That matters because vascular dementia is about circulation, not just memory in the abstract. 400 miles of blood vessels in the brain is just absurd. Human bodies are ridiculous engineering projects. And his claim is that some foods support nitric oxide, which supports circulation. Dark chocolate, beets, spinach, all these things are suddenly acting like maintenance tools. Maintenance tools is a much cooler phrase than superfood, by the way. Superfood sounds like marketing for people who own 14 blenders. That's exactly it. The stem cell connection made it feel even bigger, because now you are talking regeneration, not just prevention. And the weirdest part is that abnormal blood vessels in Alzheimer's may actually make things worse. That is such a brutal twist because the vessels are there but not helping. They're basically active damage, which is terrifying. Which is why his whole food as medicine argument feels less like wellness fluff and more like biology. I also appreciated that he did not throw drugs under the bus. He kept saying medicine matters and food matters, which is the sanest version of the argument. That balance is rare because most people online need one side to be a villain. Apparently, nuance does not get enough clicks. Shocking discovery. Supplements were another good example of that balanced thinking. He is basically saying food first, then top off what you cannot easily get. Which is reasonable, because nobody is eating perfectly all the time. If anyone says they are, I do not trust them immediately. Same, that's a red flag. The probiotic examples were interesting too, because they felt very personal and practical. Akkermansia, L. reuteri, all these names sound clinical, but the logic is simple. Support the microbes that support the body. And one of them even helps with gum health, which is such a funny bonus. Your bacteria doing dental work is wild. The favorite foods list was almost the most revealing part because it showed his real pattern. Coffee, tea, nuts, tomatoes, berries, and leafy greens is a very livable list. It is also suspiciously close to a list a normal person could actually maintain. That is exactly why it works. And I love that he did not make it punitive. He literally said, love your food to love your health, which is a nice philosophy. That part matters because people do not sustain fear forever. They sustain pleasure, habit, and identity. So if the foods you already like are also healthy, that is the real win. Exactly. Circle the foods you already enjoy and start there. Very unsexy advice, which is probably why it is good. The unsexy stuff always wins eventually. What I keep coming back to is how empowering the whole frame is. Not because it guarantees anything, but because it gives people a way to participate. And that is the thread through all 4 episodes for me. Not helplessness, not perfection, just better odds and better habits. That is also why the final question landed so well. Success is not just fame or money, it is whether your life helped other people, and whether your immediate circle is better because you were in it. That is a strong way to end a series about health because it makes health relational. For me, that is the whole point. Your choices spill outward. They affect family, work, mood, energy, and eventually the people around you. So this was never just about tomatoes or coffee or fasting. It was about agency. And that feels like the right note to leave on. Thanks for staying with us through the whole series. If this got you thinking differently about one meal, that already counts. We really appreciate you being here for the full run. And we will catch you in the next one. Welcome back. This one is about food as defense, not just fuel. And it gets into tomatoes, coffee, fasting, and the brain in a surprisingly unsexy way. Like somehow that all turns into cancer, metabolism, and longevity. Which is a wild sentence to end a series on, honestly. Wait, the tomato thing is the most interesting to me. People really hear tomatoes and think magic, but the dose matters. Half a cup, a few times a week, cooked, not a wheelbarrow. A wheelbarrow of tomatoes is such a ridiculous image. And the science angle is that lycopene may reduce blood supply to tumors. Right, anti-angiogenesis, which is one of those words that sounds fake until it is not. It sounds like a spell from a bad fantasy movie. And then the punchline is, no, eat your tomatoes. But I actually like that it is not mystical. It is ordinary food doing ordinary biological work over time. The annoying part is people want one heroic superfood. Like one tomato and suddenly you are immortal. That is exactly what he pushes back on. He keeps saying nothing takes you to zero risk. That felt mature to me. No false promises, just better odds. Coffee surprised me less because everybody already has an opinion about coffee. Everybody thinks coffee is either a miracle or a crime. He lands in the middle and says the polyphenols and chlorogenic acid matter. And maybe brown fat is the part people do not think about. The idea that coffee can help turn on thermogenesis is pretty insane. It is like your mug is coaching your metabolism. Though I did clock that he was talking 3 to 4 cups a day. That is not sip one tiny espresso and become shredded. The internet would absolutely sell it that way. Fasting felt like the most practical segment, weirdly. because he stripped it down to not eating during sleep, then extending that window. It is almost offensively simple. Like the body was never waiting for a calendar invite. I like that he made it about rhythm, not punishment. A lot of fasting talk becomes weird self-denial theater. Here it was more like, stop eating at night, sleep well, start there. And that connects to the bigger point, which is everyday behavior. Not a retreat, not a hack, just repeated choices. The brain section got heavy, though. Especially when he moved from dementia as a broad label into vascular dementia. That distinction matters a lot. Because if blood vessels are the highway, then circulation is not a side issue. It is the whole road system. And then dark chocolate, beets, spinach, nitric oxide, stem cells. That sentence sounds like a wellness startup pitch. But the underlying idea is that healthier blood flow supports the brain. The thing that hit me is how he framed abnormal blood vessels in Alzheimer's. More vessels, but worse vessels, and they may even secrete toxins. That is such an unintuitive mechanism. We always want diseases to be neat. Biology never agreed to be neat. And that is why he keeps coming back to food and lifestyle as levers. Not because they solve everything, but because they change the terrain. That line felt like the spine of the whole episode. Then the supplement section is where I think people get emotionally divided. Because nobody agrees on supplements ever. Supplements are the comment section in capsule form. He was pretty measured, though. Food first, then top off what you cannot consistently get. That is much more sane than the usual internet extremism. Vitamin D, omega-3s, certain probiotics, that felt grounded. Especially because he was clear that it is personal, not universal. Akkermansia was interesting because it sounds obscure, but he made it feel practical. That bacteria has a name that sounds like a luxury hotel. The Akkermansia suite, complementary metabolism. And then Lactobacillus reuteri doing the gut, the brain, and even the mouth. Chewable probiotic for cavities is actually a very funny concept. Your toothpaste is now competing with bacteria in a boardroom. What I keep coming back to is his language around agency. He never sold control, but he did sell participation. And that is a huge difference. It means you are not helpless, even when medicine is complicated. The 5 favorite foods answer was also revealing. Coffee, tea, tree nuts, tomatoes, berries, and then the leafy greens cluster. He tried to say 5 and immediately cheated with categories, which is the most doctor answer possible. But it made sense because he was thinking in patterns, not gimmicks. And that whole Mediterranean idea was basically his way of saying mix traditions intelligently. Not fetishize one cuisine, just borrow the best parts. I also loved that he kept saying, love your food to love your health. That is a better message than food fear. Because if the advice makes people miserable, they will not do it. And he seemed very aware that people need food they actually enjoy. He was basically saying, start with the foods you already like that are also healthy. That is almost boring advice, which is why it works. The boring stuff always wins against the glamorous stuff eventually. Especially in health. What did you make of his point about food being medicine before pharmaceuticals? I thought it was a good correction, not an anti-medicine rant. Exactly, he was not throwing drugs out. He was saying modern medicine gave us one toolbox, but we ignored the older one. Which feels very human, honestly. We love new shiny systems and then forget the basics. And the basics are eating, sleeping, moving, and choosing better repeatedly. That is not sexy, but it is durable. This whole series kept circling back to that. The body is not waiting for a dramatic rescue. It is responding to the environment you give it. Which is rude, because that means responsibility. But also hopeful, because small changes actually matter. And that feels like a good place to close the whole run. We started with a big idea and ended with a practical one. Food can be one of the quiet ways you protect your future. Thanks for being here through all 4 episodes. If this changed one meal, one habit, or one assumption, that is huge. We will catch you in the next one.